Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. I bow at the lotus feet of my Guru Paramhansa Yogananda, and I bow to his great lineage of teachers, starting with Mahavatar Babaji, Lahiri Mahashai, and Swami Shri Yukteswar Giri, and I bow to Swami Kriyananda, their great disciple. Welcome to the next episode of this series, friends. In the last couple of episodes, we have been tracing the story of the Pandava and the Kaurava brothers through the early stages of their life. As we saw already, Bhishma, who represents ego consciousness, is playing the role of grandfather for both the Pandava and the Kaurava brothers and is taking care of them in the palace of Hastinapura as they are growing up. Drona turns out to be the teacher for both the sets of brothers. The Pandava brothers represent the positive side of our own consciousness, and the Kaurava brothers represent the negative side. And Drona represents the power of habit patterns. So he is that discipline of practice that is required for achieving any goal. So it is not surprising that he turns out to be the teacher for both the sides of the war. And the other couple of developments that we've seen so far, one is the enmity between Drona and the king Drupada, and Drupada, through extreme austerities, has given birth to his daughter Draupadi, who represents that Kundalini, or the spinal energy, who's going to liberate our own soul in the battle of Kurukshetra. And the other development we saw was the friendship between Duryodhana and Karna. As we saw in the last episode, there was a huge celebration that was arranged when all the brothers returned to the palace of Hastinapura after their training. And on this occasion, Karna was scorned and ridiculed by everyone in the royal family, and Duryodhana comes to his rescue, and in return, Karna pledges unflinching loyalty and friendship to Duryodhana. Karna, as we saw, represents that desire for happiness in this world. So again, it's not surprising that he's going to side with material desires, which is what Duryodhana represents. As we saw at the end of the last episode, Dhritarashtra, because he does not have any other option at this point, due to the wise counsel of all the elders in the palace of Hastinapura, and also simply the wish of all the citizens of the country, names Yudhishthira as the next crowned prince, the one who would succeed and take over the throne after his passing. And this news has been quite shocking to Duryodhana and all the Kaurava brothers, because they were hoping that Duryodhana would be the king, and they would get to rule the country the way they wish. So they have been quite upset, and they have been scheming as to how they can get rid of the Pandava brothers and take over the throne. And that's really what we will be seeing in this episode, because the next step they plan is an elaborate scheme that they design to actually kill and get rid of the Pandava brothers. What Duryodhana does is he hires this architect named Purochana, and he designs this palace made completely of lacquer. Lacquer is a natural substance which is extremely inflammable. You can think of it as something like wax that occurs naturally in a tree. And he builds this extremely beautiful and elaborate palace in this small town called Varnavrata. And he does that so that he can send the Pandava brothers to that palace and set it to fire so they can be burned, and they wouldn't be alive anymore to compete with him for the throne of Hastinapura. So that scheme goes along, and Shakuni, his maternal uncle, he is the man behind Duryodhana, plotting all of this and helping him execute those plans. So once the palace is ready, he makes a proposal to the Pandava brothers. Now that Yudhishthira is the next crown prince, and he needs to socialize and get to know all parts of the kingdom and meet all the people, he suggests that there is this festival happening in the town of Varnavrata, and that the Pandava brothers, along with their mother Kunti, should visit that town to stay in this palace and spend some time there. And we all know why he's saying that. The Pandava brothers don't yet know what Duryodhana's plans are, although they know that he cannot be trusted. But because it's a impressive proposal and it seems like a fair idea, they say yes to it. So they go to this town of Varnavrata to stay in this palace built of lac. Vidura, who is the minister of Dhritarashtra, as we already saw, Vidura represents dharma or the righteous consciousness. He is a kind of a stepbrother to Dhritarashtra and Pandu, but he is born in the lower caste, so he's not considered as an integral part of the royal family, but still he is present everywhere and he's always counseling Dhritarashtra to do the right thing. Vidura sees through Duryodhana's plan. He knows who Purochana is and he knows why he's building a palace from this substance. So he sort of puts the pieces together and understands that this is an elaborate scheme just to kill the Pandava brothers. And he cares for not just the Pandava brothers but for righteousness. So before Yudhishthira leaves the palace of Hastinapura, he recites to him this poem, which is written in a language that's not what is usually spoken in the royal family, and there are some subtle clues present in there. He recites that in front of everybody else to Yudhishthira, so that Yudhishthira can later ponder about it and understand the clues that he's placing there. He talks something about how the rat hides under the ground and it doesn't burn even when the entire forest burns, and how a sharp tool can help you dig, and some clues like that. Basically, he is presenting to Yudhishthira the way that he can save himself when the palace is set on fire. And Yudhishthira and the Pandava brothers, along with Kunti, now go to the palace of Lacquer, the Lakshagraha, and settle down in Varnavrata. And they understand what Vidura has told them. And at the same time, Vidura also sends an expert miner to help Yudhishthira to actually start digging an underground tunnel, so when the palace is set on fire, the brothers along with their mother can go underground and escape through that tunnel, and the fire would not harm them that way. So as Purochana, who is the architect of the palace, he's still living there, is plotting to one day kill all the Pandava brothers by setting the palace on fire, the miner is also digging the tunnel to create a passage through which the Pandavas can escape. Bhima has to stay awake every night because it is at the night time that Purochana was planning to set the palace on fire, and so that he is not able to do it. Bhima stays awake and stands guard throughout the night to make sure that there's no evil that can be done to the Pandavas while they're all asleep. Now things go on like this, and the tunnel is one day complete, and there's an opportune time that the Pandava brothers find. Purochana is inebriated with alcohol, and there's a huge feast arranged in the palace. And as it happens, there is a local family that also arrives to partake in the feast with Purochana, and this family has 5 men and 1 woman. And they are all extremely drunk with alcohol, and they go to bed after this party is over. And the Pandavas see this as the right opportunity for them to escape from the palace, and they actually go under the ground, and they themselves set the palace on fire, and they leave the palace. On the other side of the river, when the tunnel goes out, Vidura has already sent them a boatman for ferrying them across and going their own way to save their lives. Now, because there was this other family present in the palace when the palace was being burned, it was all planned by the Pandava brothers in order to not leave any loopholes in their escape. When Duryodhana checks on the palace after it's burned, they do realize that there are 6 dead bodies, of 5 men and 1 woman. So it's easy for him to assume that it is the Pandava brothers and Kunti that were killed in this accident, and now the throne belongs to him. So Duryodhana is obviously elated. He's excited that he has no enemies for him in the kingdom right now, and the Pandava brothers are long gone. And he proclaims himself to be the next crown prince of Hastinapura. And things go on like this. The Pandava brothers escape, and they start going their own way, and they reach a small town called Ekachakra. Now, Ekachakra is just this place where Pandavas take refuge for a brief amount of time. The reason they cannot go back to the palace of Hastinapura is they have already seen how cunning and how scheming Duryodhana can be. And he's behind their lives right now. And with all the resources and all his evil schemes, if he discovers that the Pandava brothers and Kunti are still alive, he's not going to spare them. He's going to try to take their lives again. So they don't find that opportune moment to actually reveal their existence. They want to simply hide for some time until they think it is the right opportunity for them to show up again and obviously claim the right over the throne of Hastinapura. So that's really what's happening. And the fact that this other lady and their sons died in the palace all quite fell together to make sure that Duryodhana is completely convinced and not suspicious that the Pandava brothers are alive. So things go on like this, and the Pandavas disguise as poor Brahmins with their mother. They don't want to reveal to anyone that they're actually from the royal family, and they start living in this town of Ekachakra. They start living a very humble life of austerities and simplicity. They are begging for alms, and they simply live with very, very few resources. And they do not mind that. They're putting themselves through the required discipline before they can go back to the palace of Hastinapura and then do whatever is appropriate next. Now, the symbolism in this story is rather self-evident for us to understand, because what's really happening here is when the spiritual virtues represented by the Pandavas, they are trying to come up in their nascent form, immediately the negative pole of our consciousness, all those evil tendencies, rush to that fore and squish them. They do not allow the spiritual virtues to rise. And that part of us that is attached to the material plane, all those attachments that Shakuni represents, they do not want those spiritual virtues to take over. They do not want Yudhishthira and the Pandava brothers to gain control over the kingdom. They want to make sure that all their attachments are held safe, all the material desires can be satisfied, and that there is no threat to their existence. And they know, even if Yudhishthira is present in the palace, they cannot logically talk to him about how material desires are valid, but rather they have to completely get rid of him because they want full control over all the resources. So it is a battle that is happening inside of us. When the nascent spirituality is trying to come up, the first thing that happens is the material side of our own nature will try to vanquish that. But the story is still very inspiring despite the evil and the cunning plans of Duryodhana. It is inspiring because no matter how much the Pandavas have to go through, they're always saved. And that's really where Vidura comes in. Dharma, the righteousness of the cause of spirituality, is always standing by it. And Vidura always makes sure that the Pandavas are not treated unfairly and that they're always saved no matter what hardship they have to go through. And not only that, the Pandavas at this point, as much as they're all young men and they have all been trained under Drona, or the spiritual virtues have gone through that initial discipline of being grounded and having those abilities to fight the battle, they're still not fully mature. They have still not gotten hold of Kundalini, which is represented by Draupadi, and they've still not gone through that extreme austerity that is required in spirituality to be able to focus and gather that energy. So this whole phase that the Pandavas spend in Ekachakra is part of that process. It is part of that austerity that the spiritual virtues have to undergo so that they can gain their focus. As we will see in the next episode, at the end of their stay at Ekachakra, all the brothers, along with Kunti, circumstances lead them to the kingdom of Panchala, and they end up marrying Draupadi. And once they have gotten hold of that spinal energy, you see, the spinal energy wouldn't be theirs unless they actually went through that austerity, unless they were actually vanquished by the material desires and they had to go underground, they had to be in the hiding, and then they had to discipline themselves through simplicity and austere living. And once they have done that, they have gained control over that energy, they have gained that focus and discipline, and now they get hold of Draupadi. Now once Draupadi is their partner, they are completely changed people. The spiritual virtues are now mature to return back to the palace of Hastinapura, and then the story unfolds in a completely different way. So, this whole story of Lakshagraha, the palace of Lacquer, represents that initial stage in our own spiritual journey until we are completely grounded and disciplined and focused, until we have attained that spiritual maturity. The spiritual virtues cannot necessarily fight that material tendency within us. They still have to sometimes go into hiding. The good news, however, is that dharma always stands by spirituality. As Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, seeking God is the highest dharma for any man. There's a lot of duties that we have as human beings to our own birth families, to this planet, to our society, to all the beings around us. But higher than all those duties, the highest duty of man is to seek God, is to seek his own self realization so that he can be completely liberated and live for the rest of the world. And that is that highest dharma that is always protecting the spiritual side that is within us. And Vidura stands by the Pandava brothers through this phase, making sure that they are not harmed. So in the next episode, we will return back to the story and see how the Pandava brothers marry Draupadi and what happens when they return to the palace of Hastinapura. God bless you all.